She waited until the casket was about to close, leaned in behind me and whispered, "You have until next Friday to be out." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at my son's name on the funeral program and folded it in half like the life I'd built here meant nothing. She thought I was weak, but what she didn't know was that I held the one thing she didn't, the original deed to the house, and the last letter David ever wrote. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about a mother who stayed calm, documented everything, and proved once and for all, you don't have to raise your voice to protect what's yours. They were lowering the casket when she leaned in behind my shoulder, her breath brushing my ear like smoke. "You have until next Friday to be out." I didn't turn. I didn't flinch. My fingers just tightened around the funeral program in my lap until the thick cardstock bent beneath the pressure. I stared straight ahead while the priest droned on about peace and eternal rest, as if that could mean anything to me now. David, my son, my only child, was gone. 43 years old, strong, stubborn, tender in quiet ways only a mother would know. A heart attack, sudden and vicious, took him in the night. By the time I reached the hospital, there was nothing left but machines and apologies. And now, as the dirt softened under the weight of the casket, I sat in the front row beside the woman he married, Veronica, immaculate in a tailored black dress, not a hair out of place. The widow, the hostess, the planner of this tightly controlled grief parade, and the one who'd just whispered a knife into my back. She squeezed my shoulder as she rose, gentle, like she was comforting me. I stared straight ahead, my breath shallow, my throat raw from holding everything in. Behind me, someone whispered, "She's been so strong through all this." And I almost laughed, or screamed. I'm not sure which would have broken first. But I stayed quiet, through the service, through the final blessing, through the murmur of condolences and paper plates at the reception. I stayed quiet when Veronica helped her aunt to the car and left me standing alone on the front steps. I rode in silence beside her in David's car. The faint smell of his cologne still clung to the fabric, like it hadn't accepted he was gone yet either. I thought that would break me, but it didn't. My grief wasn't allowed to unravel. Not now, not yet, not when I had to figure out what game she was playing, because I knew her tone. It wasn't grief speaking, it was strategy, and that terrified me more than any funeral silence ever could. I moved into the house 8 years ago, not as a guest, not as a temporary visitor, but as a second anchor for the home David and Veronica were building. When David lost his job during the layoffs, I offered to help with the down payment so they wouldn't lose the place. It wasn't charity, it was family. I even signed the paperwork. David insisted. Then came the baby. Late nights, fevers, first steps. Veronica went back to work after 4 months, and I became the steady arms that held their son while they worked through life. I made meals, paid bills when money was tight, and for a long while I believed we were a team. But as soon as I stepped back into the house after the funeral, something felt colder. The family photo wall, gone. The hallway where David's childhood pictures once hung was stripped bare. Even the small frame on the entry table with all 3 of us, replaced with a vase of lilies and a scented candle. I walked toward my room on autopilot, only to stop dead in the doorway. The bed was made, but differently, tightly, like a hotel. My blanket was folded at the foot, not the way I left it. The lamp on my nightstand was unplugged and shifted. The dresser drawers were half closed. When I opened them, some of my clothes were missing. I opened the closet. Boxes, labeled in neat handwriting. Mom's linens, guest room extras, books, miscellaneous. I stood there for several seconds, blinking, trying to make sense of the impossible. My heart wasn't racing, it was sinking, like someone had pulled the floor out from under me and left nothing but silence to catch the fall. I walked back out to the kitchen where Veronica was arranging charcuterie leftovers into glass containers, humming to herself. "Did you move my things?" I asked, steady. She glanced over her shoulder, then smiled. "Oh, just tidying up. I thought we could start clearing some space, emotional clarity and all that." She said it like it was a yoga cleanse, like she was doing me a favor. I didn't reply. I just stood there watching her seal the lid on a container that wasn't hers, in a kitchen that didn't feel like mine anymore. I wanted to scream, to remind her I'd rocked her baby to sleep while she recovered from surgery, that I'd used my retirement savings to help her keep this roof, that David and I had talked, planned, signed. But I said nothing, because you don't throw stones when someone's already digging their own foundation cracks. You wait, and you remember, and then you look for the deed. Over the next few days, Veronica shifted from silent intimidation to tactical maneuvering. She didn't push, not directly. No confrontations, no yelling, just soft invasions disguised as courtesy. "Would it be easier if I called some movers for you?" she asked one morning, sipping coffee from the mug David bought me last Christmas. I looked up from the crossword puzzle I hadn't touched in 3 days and said nothing. "I know how hard transitions can be," she added, her voice all faux sympathy. "Sometimes it helps to get a head start, you know? Mentally." The words sat between us like mold on bread. I walked away, but something had changed in me. She wasn't going to back off, and I wasn't going to be caught flat-footed. That night, when the house was quiet and she was tucked in her pristine bedroom, I pulled out my old file box from the top of the closet, the one I'd labeled Home Docs, Important, in black marker. Inside were utility records, old tax returns, scanned receipts, and the folder that used to hold the original deed. Used to. It was empty. I flipped through every document twice, then dumped the box onto the bed. Bills, warranty slips, a typed agreement from when I helped fund the down payment, but no deed, no title. The folder wasn't just empty, it had been disturbed. My tabs were out of order. The pages bent in corners I never folded. She'd gone through it. And suddenly it made sense, how my nightstand drawer was sticking, how the closet door had been left open a crack one afternoon when I knew I'd closed it. Veronica was searching, and she thought I was too old, too slow, too sentimental to notice. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding, mind spinning. She was clearing a path, not just to the house, but to erasing me from it. Erasing me from David's memory, from his home, from his life. But then, through the static of fear, something surfaced. A conversation I'd nearly forgotten. David was always the kind of son who didn't want to leave loose ends. After he lost his first job and we helped them buy the house, he insisted on getting everything in order. "Just in case," he'd said. "We don't need drama in a crisis." I remember the day we signed the deed, his pen stuttering slightly as he initialed every line. Veronica wasn't there, she'd gone to a conference. David had driven me to the bank himself, folder in hand. As we left, he'd said, "Mom, I'm going to keep a copy at home, but I want you to put the original in your deposit box." "Not mine, yours. I trust you to protect it." And I had. That memory hit me like oxygen in a sealed room. I got out of bed, shoved everything back in the box, and walked to the living room. Veronica was watching some reality show, feet curled under her, face lit up by the TV glow. "I'm running an errand," I said. She didn't look away. "Need anything while you're out?" Number just some clarity. She looked at me then, eyes narrowing. I gave nothing away. I drove straight to the bank. The safe deposit key had been at the back of my jewelry drawer all along, tucked into the sleeve of an old scarf. I hadn't used the box in years, but my name was still on the account. The clerk escorted me into the tiny room with the heavy metal drawers. I pulled the box from the wall, placed it on the table, and opened it with a shaking hand. There, between my birth certificate and a locket with David's childhood photo, was the thick manila envelope. I pulled it out, peeled back the flap, and nearly cried. The deed, my name, David's signature, the notary stamp, filed, stamped, dated. Not a copy, the original. Veronica didn't know it existed. I scanned every page at the bank's digital kiosk, sent one to my email, uploaded a copy to the cloud, then printed 2 backups, one for my lawyer, one for my drawer, because now I needed more than memories. I needed defense. I called Francis Adair that afternoon. She'd helped David and me once before, when we updated our wills after his diagnosis scare. She was sharp, discreet, and didn't waste time. I told her everything, from Veronica's whispered threat to the missing files and the retrieved deed. She listened in silence. When I finished, she said only 3 words: "Come in tomorrow." And for the first time since the casket closed, I exhaled. The deed was real. So was I. And Veronica had just declared war on the wrong woman. The next morning, I walked into Frances Adair's office wearing the same coat I'd worn to David's funeral. Not on purpose. Just something about the weight of it felt right. Like armor. Her office was tidy and classic, with deep oak shelves and a glass paperweight on her desk that caught the morning light in a quiet kind of way. Frances stood as I entered, offered her hand, and gave me a nod that meant she remembered. David. The last time we were here. A very different time. She gestured for me to sit and said, "Let's begin." I handed her the manila envelope and sat in silence while she read the deed line by line. Her eyes didn't widen, didn't narrow, just flicked steadily across the document like someone assembling a chessboard. She finally looked up and said, "This is clear co-ownership. You're on the title, notarized and recorded. That means you cannot be evicted. Not by her, not by any court unless you choose to leave." I nodded, though my hands were still clenched in my lap. "She'll try other ways," Frances added. "Emotional pressure, legal bluffs, possibly even forged notices. But none of that holds up." She paused, then leaned forward. "Your contributions. Do you have records of those?" "I paid into the down payment with a cashier's check. I still have the stub." "Perfect. That makes the case bulletproof." Bulletproof. I let the words settle in my chest like a stone that finally landed after a long fall. Frances opened her drawer and pulled out a legal pad. "We'll begin with a notice of shared title. That makes it official on record. You're a co-owner, and she's barred from taking any independent action on the property." I exhaled. It wasn't relief exactly. It was grounding. Like I was planting my feet back into the foundation of something solid after being pushed to the edge. Frances looked me square in the eyes. "But if there's anything else she's hiding, financial documents, alternate versions of the will, you need to let me know. We're not just protecting your rights now, we're preserving David's wishes." And that's when I realized this wasn't about surviving anymore. It was about making sure Veronica couldn't rewrite the last 8 years into something that erased me. I left her office with a copy of the filing, instructions to remain calm, and a legal backup finally forming behind me. The line had been drawn, and I wasn't standing on it. I was standing on the right side of it. It was 3 days after my meeting with Frances that Veronica announced, over herbal tea and hollow eyes, I wasn't going to say anything yet, but I'm pregnant. She placed one hand gently over her stomach, the other still curled around her mug. Her tone was soft, shaky, meant to sound fragile. I blinked, slow and deliberate. "How far along?" 8 weeks, she said, a little too quickly. "Maybe 9. David had been dead for 10. She continued before I could speak. "We'd been trying again. David wanted more children, you know. We had a donor plan in place just in case. He wanted me to have a piece of him, even if something happened." Her eyes glistened and her voice cracked right on cue. It was a performance, polished, timed, and entirely fabricated. I nodded. "That must be a lot to carry." She exhaled slowly, visibly relieved that I hadn't questioned her, not out loud. But my mind was already moving, fast, because David would have told me if they were trying again. He told me everything. And the sonogram she left on the counter the next day, dated only 4 weeks ago, confirmed what I already suspected. The math didn't add up. Neither did the appointments. I checked the online calendar they'd once shared with me when I helped coordinate childcare. No medical visits logged, no notes, nothing until after David died. And she wasn't just creating a lie. She was creating a narrative. The grieving widow, alone, expecting, forced to navigate grief and pregnancy under one roof with her unstable mother-in-law. She even started placing small hints into conversation. "The baby's going to need space. she murmured one evening as she folded laundry that used to be mine. "It's going to be hard to raise a child in a stressful environment." She looked at me then, waiting, but I didn't blink, didn't flinch. I started documenting every slip, every date inconsistency, every time she said he wanted this when I knew David never would have allowed it. Then one night I passed her office while she was on a phone call. She was speaking softly, but not softly enough. I told her I'm pregnant. No, she didn't push back. Not yet. A pause. I'm laying the groundwork. Once I've got control of the narrative, it'll be easier. Narrative. That's all it was to her. Not grief, not love, just strategy. I stepped into the hallway where she could see me and made just enough noise to let her know she was being watched. She ended the call and gave me a smile. "Need something?" she asked. I smiled back. Just clarity. She blinked, confused for a split second. But I didn't stay long enough for her to recover. Because now, I had more than suspicion. I had motive. And she didn't know I was 2 steps ahead. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I found it. Veronica had gone out to one of her grief yoga sessions. Another event added suddenly to her schedule that she claimed helped with the stress of pregnancy. I'd stayed behind, cleaned the dishes, folded laundry, put her tea towels back in the wrong drawer on purpose. Then I went into the office. David's office. Mine now, in all but name. She'd started using it more since the funeral. Laptop open, files on the desk, folders carefully labeled in tidy handwriting. Estate, utilities, reallocation plan. The language alone made my stomach turn. But it was the manila folder near the bottom of the drawer that caught my eye. Labeled in permanent marker, updated will. I sat in his old desk chair, the leather one he bought after his promotion, the one she called clunky, and opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside, a printed will dated March 12th. David died on February 2nd. I flipped to the final page, heart hammering. The signature, his name in blue ink, was clean. Too clean. Perfectly centered. No smudge, no hesitation, no natural variation. I knew my son's handwriting. I had birthday cards and Christmas notes and decades of "Love you, Mom" scribbled across sticky notes. This wasn't it. At the bottom of the page was a notary stamp. But even that looked wrong. Low resolution, slightly pixelated, like it had been scanned, cropped, and dropped onto the page. But the most damning part? The beneficiaries. The will stated Veronica as sole heir, sole owner of the house, sole executor of the estate. No mention of me, no mention of our shared title, no mention of anything that existed before Veronica's version of the story began. I took photos of every page, emailed them to myself, then backed them up to the cloud. I didn't touch anything else. Just closed the folder and placed it back exactly where I found it, tilted slightly forward, just as she'd left it. That evening, I forwarded the files to Frances with a simple message. "We have a forgery and a date problem." She called me back within the hour. "You're sure of the signature?" she asked. "Positive," I said. "It's not his, and the notary stamp looks faked." "Then we move." She didn't say anything else, just told me she'd be filing for fraudulent will review, property deed preservation, and injunction against inheritance claim. I thanked her, then sat in the dark kitchen for a while. No lights, no sound. Just the glow of the refrigerator humming behind me and the creak of wood under the pressure of winter air. Veronica thought she'd buried the truth in paper and polite lies. She didn't know I'd just found the shovel. It took 5 days. 5 days of silence. Veronica kept up her act, drifting through the house like a candle in a cathedral. She wore soft sweaters and made sad tea. She'd pause in front of David's photos like she was praying, though she was the one who had taken most of them down the week after the funeral. And I stayed quiet, did the laundry, read the mail, pretended not to hear the whispered phone calls behind closed doors. Until the 6th day, when the doorbell rang just after 4 p.m., Veronica opened it with her usual grace, hair curled, makeup soft, expression measured. A man in a gray coat stood on the porch holding a thick white envelope. "Veronica Lynn Winslow?" he asked, calm, official. "Yes," she replied. "You've been served." He handed her the envelope and turned without another word. She stared after him, frozen. I watched from the hallway. She stepped inside, closed the door, and looked down at the envelope like it might catch fire. I walked into the kitchen. Didn't say a word. A moment later, she followed. "What is this?" she demanded. I poured a cup of coffee. "You'll have to read it." She tore the envelope open, scanning the first page, then the second. Her lips started to move, whispering silently as her eyes raced through the text. Notice of intent to investigate fraudulent will filing request for court review of title ownership property. Injunction pending legal resolution. And at the bottom in crisp black type, filed by Francis Adair, Estate Counsel to Clara Winslow. "You told them I forged the will," she hissed. "No," I said steady. "The dates told them." Her voice cracked. "You think this proves anything?" I set down my cup. "I think it's a start." She stepped closer. "This is harassment. You're going to make this so ugly." I met her gaze. "You tried to erase me," I said quietly. "But I never left." Her face twitched. Some mix of rage, disbelief, and panic all trying to hold hands at once. Then she turned, walked into the dining room, and slammed the envelope down onto the table so hard a fork from lunch rattled off the edge. She didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. And I didn't speak to her. I didn't need to. Because the silence had shifted. For weeks it was mine. The silence of fear, of planning, of uncertainty. Now, it was hers. The silence of a woman watching her story crumble, one documented truth at a time. It was late, after midnight. The house was silent in that eerie way only old grief can make it. No creaking floorboards, no humming dishwasher, just the stillness of two women under one roof, one sharpening knives in the dark, the other quietly collecting truth. I couldn't sleep. Again. So I wandered into David's old office. I hadn't been back since the forgery. This time I didn't open her drawers. I opened his. Bottom drawer, right side, the one that used to stick until he greased the hinges. Inside were old phone chargers, pens, tax folders, and a folded piece of paper. It wasn't labeled. No envelope. Just creased once down the center and tucked behind a thick booklet on mortgage options. I pulled it out. It was his handwriting. I knew it before I even opened it. The slant of the D in David, the way his R's always dipped too low. The ink was faint in places, but the words were clear. "If anything happens to me, I need you to know I'm sorry." I sat down right there on the office floor. My knees cracked. My heart cracked more. The letter was a confession, a grieving one. "I know I've let her isolate me. I know I stopped telling you things. I thought I could fix it. I thought if I just kept the peace long enough, she'd soften. But she didn't. She made me feel like choosing you meant losing everything else. And that's my failure, not yours." I read it 3 times before I could even blink. My hands trembled as I reached the end. "Don't let her take everything. This house was always ours, not hers. Do what you have to do, Mom." There was no date, but the folds were clean. The paper yellowed only slightly at the edges. It was real, and it was enough. I scanned it, photographed it, stored it in my cloud, my lawyer's inbox, and my drawer under the deed. Then I sat for a long time in the dark office, the page in my lap, the world finally slowing down. David was gone, but not silent. He hadn't abandoned me. He had left me one last act of protection, one final push. And now, Veronica had nothing left to fake. She tried one last time. 2 days after she was served, she came into the kitchen holding her phone, eyes brimming with fake vulnerability. "I've spoken to a reporter," she said. "They're interested in a story about elder abuse and inheritance fraud, about a grieving widow being targeted by an unstable relative." I didn't look up from my tea. "You'll be asked for proof." She hesitated. "I have everything I need." I looked her square in the eye. "Then I'll show them the forged will. The ultrasound dated 4 weeks after David died. And now," I opened the drawer beside me. The letter he left. I placed it gently on the counter like a closing argument. She stared at it, didn't touch it, didn't breathe. "You're bluffing," she whispered. "Try me." For the first time since the funeral, Veronica didn't have a script. Her face twitched like she couldn't decide if she should scream or cry. She chose neither. She just turned and walked out. The next morning, boxes appeared in the hallway, labeled sloppily this time, tape peeling, bags half-zipped. She moved like someone who knew there was no longer a camera watching. I didn't ask where she was going. I didn't ask when. I just waited. Friday morning, she stood in the kitchen with her last bag slung over her shoulder. "You don't have to do this," she said. I stirred my tea. "Neither did you." She stepped back like the sentence had hit her somewhere fragile. "Where am I supposed to go?" I met her eyes and said without malice, "Anywhere that isn't here." She stared for another beat, then turned and left. The door didn't slam this time. It just clicked shut behind her like the final line of a book. I watched from the window as she stood on the porch for a moment, car keys in hand. No tears, no final threats. Just that vacant expression of someone who lost not only the house, but the story she built inside it. She got in her car and drove off without looking back. And I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done. I turned off the porch light, locked the door, and walked through the house in silence. Not the tense kind, not the hunted kind, but real silence. Clean, whole, my kind. I lit a candle by the fireplace, set David's letter beside it, rehung the photo she had once hidden in the garage. Then I sat at the kitchen table, wrapped my hands around a warm cup of tea, and let the light pour through the window. No threats, no papers, no waiting, just morning, just peace, just home. I thought I would feel relief, something big, something loud. But when she left, and the sound of her car disappeared down the road, what I felt wasn't fireworks or finality. It was stillness. Not the kind that hovers before a blow, but the kind that lingers after a storm finally passes. The kind that lets you exhale without thinking about what might hit you next. The house was quiet in the way only a house truly owned can be. That evening, I moved slowly from room to room, not inspecting, not tidying, just being, breathing in the spaces I had helped build, touching the corners she had tried to erase. I opened the closet in the hallway and found one of David's old jackets she had tried to pack away. I hung it back on the hook by the door. It belonged there. He did too. In the living room, I unpacked the last of my boxes, the ones she had labeled guest items and stacked like I was luggage waiting to be claimed. I took my time, placing each book back on the shelf, refolding the blankets in the basket by the recliner. Then I reached into my drawer and pulled out the letter. David's letter. I reread it by the fire, not to relive the pain, but to anchor the truth. His words were still there. His regret, his love, his warning, his trust. I placed it beside the candle on the mantel, not hidden, not stored, but out in the open where it belonged. Later, I stood by the front door. The frame that used to hold Veronica's minimalist art was now home to a photo I'd taken out of the attic. A picture of David holding his son in one arm, me in the background mid-laugh, hair messy, apron on. A real moment, a real family. I whispered softly to no one and everyone, "We're okay now." And then I made tea. Simple, unrushed, no door wedge, no quiet footsteps in the hall, no fear that something would be moved or stolen or scrubbed away. Just a woman in her kitchen, in her home, drinking from the mug her son gave her. Outside, the wind moved the trees, not violently, just enough to remind me the world was still turning. But for once, it was turning in my favor. I opened the window above the sink, let the air in, let the house breathe. And as I sat back at the table, eyes closed, the weight in my chest finally lifted. I didn't win because I fought harder. I won because I never stopped knowing what was mine, because I remembered, because I stayed. And now, with no more voices whispering in the dark, no more papers left unsigned, and no more stories being rewritten, I looked out toward the porch she once stood on, and smiled. My house, my rules,